September 12, 2025, the Korean Association of Science and Technology Studies and the Korean Association of Women's Studies convened their inaugural joint forum entitled The Encounter of Science and Technology Studies and Women's Studies. This inaugural joint conference was of particular importance as it provided the first opportunity to collectively reflect on the current state of feminist studies, feminist science technology studies in South Korea. This forum also demonstrated the expanding scope of feminist SDS and the thematic diversification. The current state of research is the collective accomplishment of many women researchers in various disciplines who have pursued their feminist inquiries over the past 30 years. In today's presentation, I will provide a cross-disciplinary overview of the development of feminist science studies, science technology studies in South Korea. How has the field been evolving since the emergence of the 1990s? How have its research in subjects been diversified? What changes have occurred in researchers at critical consciousness? This historical reflection is important since it can inform how we define our future tasks. It was not until the 1980s that women became a legitimate research category in South Korea. In 1981, the academic journal Korean Sociology dedicated a special issue to women's problems for the first time. Subsequent research papers concentrated on feminist critique of sexism, gender power relations, the relationship between productive and reproductive labor, and the intersection between gender and class. The 1985 establishment of the Korean Women's Studies Journal is widely regarded as important catalyst for the advent of feminist sociology in Korea, inaugurating the feminist intervention into the production of sociological knowledge. Researchers began to actively analyze women's hitherto ignored experiences in both domestic spaces and labor markets. In the early 1990s, female sociologists introduced gender theories, challenging gender binarism and biological determinism. The necessity to establish women's sociology as a separate discipline was argued based on the new conceptualization of gender as a social construct. Further scholars called for the establishment of a feminist paradigm that would provide new perspective and analytical frameworks through which they could re-examine the social reality with the goal of cultivating more gender egalitarian social relations. Apart from these academic discussions in the social sciences, several women scientists began to draw attention from the early 1990s to the scarcity of women scientists in the stem cells, advocating for quantitative gender balance. The issue of gender inequality was first raised in 1983 by Park Young-ja's article, A Study on the Status and Role of Korean Women Scientists in Basic Natural Sciences. This issue dominated scholarly discourse until the mid-1990s. Reports and papers demonstrated that the utilization of professional women scientists and engineers was disproportionately low in Korea compared to other advanced countries. They also identified the following factors as contributing to the underrepresentation of women in field of science: the relatively low socioeconomic status of women scientists, insufficient preferential policies, inadequate science education for women, etc. And they proposed solutions also, such as the reinforcement women's women's science education, including the establishment of new women's engineering college. the engineering college is not complete, not accomplished until now. The introduction of employment quotas and the implementation of countermeasures against gender discrimination in workplaces, combined with the activities of Korean Association of Women in Science and Technology, the scientist researchers' efforts contributed to the 2002 legislation of the Act on fostering and supporting women scientists and engineers. In the mid 1990s, a group of women scholars associated with the discipline of science technology studies began to introduce feminist STS theories and related research. In 1998, Jo Joo-hyun presented Donna Haraway's theory at a socialist conference as an alternative paradigm for analyzing science technology from a feminist perspective. And in 1999, Oh Jo-young-nan and Hong Sung-woo published their co-authored milestone volume Beyond Men's Science in Korean 남성의 과학을 넘어서. I had also contributed to the book. It introduced feminist STS studies demonstrating the social construction of sex knowledge and the interrelationship between science and gender, also critiquing scientific knowledge, the racialized gender, and racial inequality. This theoretical expansion significantly broadened research agendas for domestic scholars. During this period, scholars in women's studies also began to question the impact of new information technologies on women's labor, at times deploying the feminist STS theories in their research. As researchers in feminist STS and women's studies deepened their analysis of gender equality, they began to question the adequacy of existing policies. Scholars attributed previous policy failure to the narrowly focused agenda of women scientist organizations whose leaders tried to negotiate with government officials without engaging with the broader women's movement or feminist scholars. There are no meeting, no connection between the women's studies and the women scientists. Feminist scholars argued that true progress would require more than just representation. It demanded the creation of employment opportunities and work environment that took into consideration the unique experience of women scientists. Furthermore, they advocated for a paradigm shift in policy, one that supported scientific knowledge production and technological development through a lens that acknowledged and reflected women's experiences. This new generation of scholars began to call for alternative policy development. Their common objective was to elucidate the political nature of women's bodily experiences and to recast women as dynamic agents in technological interventions. The advent of new productive technologies afforded infertile women the opportunity to become mothers, thereby fulfilling societal expectations of maternal practice and activating a state of normality. For this reason, women actively embraced the new technologies. Paradoxically, however, this technological innovation had the effect of further entrenching the normative definition of motherhood, restricting it within the traditional parameters of biological kinship, thereby also promoting women's technological dependency and the instrumentalization of their bodies. With the introduction of reproductive technologies, women seem to have gained further control over their reproductive capacity, but it also cost them the loss of bodily autonomy. Reproductive technologies attracted particular public attention at this time because of a significant increase in state investment in related fields. You may have heard about the Huang Wusok scandal, in which the veterinarian and bioengineer committed a research fraud. The scandal and the subsequent anti-science activities of his supporters brought customized stem cell production technology into the public spotlight. This instance drew social attention to related issues such as egg trafficking and egg extraction protocols. Feminist researchers challenges the commodification of women's bodies while their utilization as experimental subjects, questioning what impacts this phenomenon would have on women's lives. In retrospect, we may say that following the formation of the field in the 1990s, feminist science technology studies took root in South Korea during the first decades of the new millennium. This period saw women researchers moving beyond the demand of greater representation of women in STEM fields and the initial engagement with cyber technofeminism into a more critical reflections on gender biases in scientific knowledge and technological innovation. Propelling this development was a series of social controversies over state policies on science and technology and their consequences, both intended and unintended. The period's scientific debates over bioengineering and reproductive technologies brought women's issues to the center of SDS, thus galvanizing the establishment of feminist SDS. Throughout the 2010s, the field of feminist STS progressively matured with a substantial expansion and diversification of its thematic focus. First, there was a significant increase in studies on the gender development processes of individual technologies and scientific knowledge. Biotechnology and reproductive technologies remain as the major concerns, but scholarly interest shifted from the earlier emphasis on women's agency to more concrete issues such as how experts perceive surplus embryos and oocytes as research biomaterials, how we should address relevant legal ethical issues, and what regulatory policies should govern the handle of these materials as waste. A significant proportion of studies centered on women's health concerns pertaining to reproductive technologies. Empirical studies showed that women's health was often sacrificed during the introduction of national support program for infertile couples, a state policy for low birth rates. Research findings had indicated that the IVF procedure led to an escalation in the risks associated with pregnancy and childbirth in the absence of mandatory structured professional accountability. Feminist STS research subjects is now spanned to wider range for me to cover them all in this representation. New themes include, but are not limited to, the gendered differences of women engineering students, a feminist critique of gender binarism in neuroscience, a gendered analysis of what constitutes a risk, and a study of the impacts of digitization and AI on women. Women's studies journals have also seen an increase of STS papers addressing topics like the connection between digital technologies such as SNS and women's political subjectification and critical analysis of the fourth industrial revolution discourse from a feminist perspective. What are then the tangible outcomes of this multifaceted research? Studies on gendered risk perception, for instance, have demonstrated that risk management frameworks must be designed and implemented with the gender sensitivity to account for distinct vulnerabilities of different demographic groups. Similarly, a feminist discourse analysis of the fourth industrial revolution critique the prevailing narratives for their reliance on technological determinism and gender essentialism. As these examples illustrate, by adopting a feminist lens, researchers have been able to generate novel lines of inquiry and identify alternative solutions. However, significant challenges remain. This include the necessity of establishing analytical frameworks that transcend binary gender systems and the development of particularly methodologies that empower women workers and social minorities to actively engage in the technological design process. Lastly, another salient development in the realm of feminist STS over the past 5 years is the emergence of studies that address posthumanism and the intricate dynamics of human-non-human relationships. The field has subsequently broadened its focus to encompass a wide range of contemporary issues, from women's science education and career building to gender biases in medical science and digital technologies, and finally to a feminist critique of developmentalist discourses. Earlier advocates of gender equality in the world of science technology contributed to increasing the number of women in scientific professions, but the epistemological limitations of this quantitative equality measure gave rise to later feminist interventions that questioned the lack of consideration for women's unique experiences and interests. For the methodological enhancement of their research, Korean scholars translated various Thai feminist and gender theories from post-human, post-structuralist to and postmodern to a new materialist, and deepened their studies on domestic case by applying the new theoretical lenses. As researchers in the general STS field began sharing and applying Bruno Latour's ANT theories that transcend the human-non-human distinction, feminist STS also started incorporating perspectives beyond the human. Consequently, the scope of feminist STS research subjects has been expanded beyond the human, encompassing not only animals and plants, but also artificial and natural objects, and the field has evolved from advocating gender inequality to promoting ecological justice across multiple species. One now then, much of these issues will continue to demand our attention for a long time to come. For now, though, I may point out the recent turn to practice within feminist STS. It was around 2019 that academic journals in gender, law, and philosophy began to seriously tackle the issue of AI and gender discrimination, and the intersection of AI and feminism became a major concern in both women's studies and STS by 2021. Scholars have called for strong institutional responses to fix the gender biases that is often baked into algorithm. But beyond oversight and alongside concomitant social reform efforts, we need direct technical practice. We cannot just theoretically critique the code, but also need to change its social metrics. We need to build systems that actively foster and support feminist tech developers, empowering them to make feminist AI. I argue. This view further advocates for a shift toward practice. We should aim to achieve feminist technology through technological practice, all the while keeping in mind the lessons of gender studies. Thank you for listening.